Well, welcome to the Heart of the Black Madonna channel with me, your host, Stephanie Georgiev. Thank you so much for tuning in. And also welcome to my new subscribers. I so appreciate your liking and sharing this channel. Make sure to check out my podcast, The Black Madonna Speaks, on Anchor Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and the Wisdom Podcast app. A special shout out to my Patreon supporters. Without you, I would not be able to continue my research and writings. There's an ancient Chinese proverb that states, "May you live in interesting times." I'm not sure whether this proverb is a blessing or a curse. For those of us who have been living through the past several years, at least for myself, I'm at interesting fatigue. I would like to be a little bored for just a little while so we could catch our breath, so I could catch my breath. I do not know anyone or any place on earth these days that is having a calm, relaxed time. Everything is in a state of upheaval. Sometimes I look back just a decade ago when a naked celebrity dominated the news cycle for weeks, sparking endless discussions by experts and pundits. Now, major earth-shattering developments happen hourly. Every day, I hear news spokespeople say, quote, "We had a completely different show planned for today, but fill in the blank with OMG, can you believe this happened?" Now, celebrity gossip is so passé, unless, of course, one is a billionaire who is trying to out-stupid other billionaires. I must confess, I almost miss reality TV information. Now, who has time or attention for tabloid anything? But what is going on really? It's hard to put one's finger on any sort of issue to understand why everything is so chaotic these days, on a level we've not really seen in centuries, to be honest. As you know, I view art as a reflection of consciousness. I found movies and cinema an interesting commentary on culture, sometimes almost in a prophetic way. Take the absolute blockbuster cable TV show a few years back that captivated the attention of the entire world for over a decade, only to deeply disappoint ardent fans with its ending no one could see coming. The story, as it is really true about most of human history, was a tale of earthly power and what people do to obtain it. The show, which is based on fiction inspired by medieval European history, had an extra added dimension of magic and dragons, which sometimes I wonder if we don't have either one of those right now, to be honest. But the basic story of grabs for power, no matter the cost to self and others, is the same we see repeated endlessly in various fantasy series and historical cycles. An interesting thing for me personally, while the ending of the 10-year cable program was odd, it was actually a profound take on power. That a paraplegic young man would become the high king of the realm after so much violence of others to obtain the throne. Violence that he never committed and violence that crippled him as a child. This ending that sparked petitions demanding a different ending, which was also quite telling in terms of the human condition, in that we humans think things should always be and end the way we want them to, and will do whatever we can to force the situation to our liking. This ending of a fantasy fiction story was, in my opinion, a deep statement on that old Bible verse, "The meek shall inherit the earth." In fact, the verse, which is found in Psalms 37:11, in the King James Version is, but the meek shall inherit the earth and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace. As an American, what I have witnessed in my culture during the last decade or so is a naked grab for power through any means necessary, including a public disregard for the Constitution, the rule of law, reality in general, and the organizing of violent armed militia and endless, blatantly false propaganda diminishing public trust in institution, regardless of the cost to self, and certainly not in the interests of the American people. There are many ways to interpret current events, but what seems different to me this time is the lack of shame or desire to be sneaky about such activities. As we watch all sorts of uprisings, wars, religious strife, political shenanigans, and blatant lying over the world, what it gets down to it, all of this drama is really about power. It is very telling to research power in terms of academics, practice, and definition. The word power is quite interesting. One can find all sorts of quotes and research articles on the subject. What does the word power mean exactly? Obviously, there are dictionaries to help out. The definition that is most pertinent to our exploration: power is the capacity or ability to direct or influence the behavior of others or the course of events. In this context, power can be seen as coercive or inspirational. And you could also see that power may be inspiring others to be coercive, as we are learning through the public hearings on the attack of the US Capitol, which ironically happened on the liturgical calendar date of Epiphany. A book that influenced me deeply was written by Russian anthroposophist Sergei Prokofiev. I read it while I was in Beijing, China, at the United Nations Fourth Conference on Women, which interestingly was all about how women's lack of power on the planet harms them deeply on every level imaginable. Anyways, I read it while sitting up all night waiting for my group to arrive from the States. It has made, obviously, a lasting impression on me. The book is titled The Spiritual Origins of Eastern Europe and the Future of the Grail Mysteries. Prokofiev grew up in the last vestiges of Stalinist USSR and read German books by Steiner in his basement because such literature was forbidden during those times. Obviously, he lived with the specter of an atheistic government where religion was outlawed and punished. So it was fascinating to me when I read his essay on the problem with the theocracy. A theocracy is a system of government of a state by immediate divine guidance or by officials who are regarded as divinely guided, such as priests. We can see such governments in Afghanistan and Iran, and there are many in North America and all of Europe who are trying to instill these types of governments through various means, particularly through violence and coercive lying. I thought, wow, one would think a devout Christian living under such persecution would welcome a theocracy. But Prokofiev puts his criticism into context. He referred to the 40 days Christ was in the wilderness. This was the time right at the beginning of Christ's mission on earth, immediately following the baptism in the Jordan, commemorated through the Christian festival of Epiphany. The 40 days in the wilderness was where Christ was getting used to human existence and preparing for his ministry. As some of you may remember, during this time in the desert, he was visited by the adversaries and tempted 3 times. These 3 temptations were part of his preparation to deal with being human, and they were the 3 temptations we all face during our own earthly sojourn. The temptations we all deal with as humans involve earthly power and materialism. The temptation of turning stones into bread was about materialism and what sort of faith, belief, and trust we put in the material world. The other temptations involved power. One was about throwing himself off a cliff, and the other was bowing down to the evil one in order to gain worldly power. Twice, Christ was offered earthly power, and twice he said no to earthly power. Why would Christ reject earthly power? It would certainly have made his job easier if he had the cooperation of governments. And certainly he and his followers might not have been persecuted or executed by such earthly powers if those in charge were under the direct influence of Christ. We can hear the arguments now. Imagine the good that could have been done. Why on earth did Christ reject earthly power? Because earthly power is coercive and does not respect individual freedom. Earthly power often turns into greed, violence, and oppression. And the old adage, absolute power, and I will put in the caveat on this statement, absolute earthly power corrupts absolutely, not only on earth, but throughout the cosmos. Isn't it interesting? The armed militias storming the US Capitol on Epiphany Day, what sort of temptation were they succumbing to that Christ said no to in the 40 days before he began his ministry on earth? What is earthly power? It is a power of the material, meaning amassing material things, material wealth, material coercive influence over other beings. It is control over earthly things, the control over things such as air, land, water, food, and people. Earthly power in the materialistic sense is devoid of spirit and love and does not respect freedom. In the Gospel of John, chapters 15 through 18, there are profound events and teachings. These are the chapters where Christ is giving his farewell instructions and the lead up to the crucifixion. The time of the incarnation was a brutal one. The Romans viciously oppressed their conquered lands in order to keep peace, or Pax Romana, as it is called. The Romans were brutal in order to have control and power over everything. Palestine had been annexed in 63 BC. One of the most profound statements in these verses where Christ was before Pontius Pilate. He was being tried for things like healing the sick on the Sabbath and saying that he was the Son of God. But the real biggie was that he said, or he implied, that he was King of the Jews. Why were these actions and statements so horrible and worthy of crucifixion? Because they challenged earthly power structures of religious authorities, who in turn used secular earthly authorities to carry out their plan to maintain authority, to secure earthly power. Pilate asked Jesus if he was King of the Jews. Christ answered, "My kingdom is not of this world," which is found in John 18, verse 36. Because of this answer, Pilate was willing to release him, mainly because an otherworldly king was not a threat to Pilate's earthly power. Pilate thought Jesus was a dreamer. We know what happened next, and ultimately what happened. One form of power, earthly power, was enforced to maintain earthly power. But the ending that no one saw coming was how real, deep, cosmic, spiritual power, through weakness, prevailed for the benefit of the universe. How do we deal with power? What is our response? And how do we wield power? What does all of this have to do with the Black Madonna? The word power must be understood in the context of one's perspective and experience. Emotions are tied up in our perceptions, which is why power is such a profound experience. Image is power because image can communicate messages which may be uncomfortable or challenge perceptions and experience. An image, art, is a method by which the gods communicate to humanity. Religion is a powerful force in multiple directions. This quote is from Sister Joan Chittister, an American Benedictine nun who is passionate and an advocate for social justice and the moral use of power. The American Association for the Advancement of Science held a conference at its annual meeting in December 1952. The 1950s were a unique time in human history. The world was reeling from World War II. The Nuremberg trials were fresh in everyone's memory, and the horrors of the war and the Holocaust were a daily experience. The United States had just recently unleashed 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, and the world realized that humans now had the capacity to destroy the earth several times over with this power. What was the response? Nations rushed to get their own nuclear bombs to make sure no one invaded their land, and the arms race had begun. It was an interesting time in the world of entertainment, as the birth of the Japanese monster movie of things like Godzilla and Gamera were born. Interestingly, these creatures that squashed Japanese cities were the result of nuclear fallout in the stories. The world, especially religious institutions, were in deep consternation regarding World War II and the specter of the nuclear holocaust. The latter, which was the ultimate exertion of human power over all of life and even the will of God. In the midst of all this turmoil, the Catholic Church instituted the dogma of the Virgin Mary, which formalized centuries of folk practices honoring the Virgin as a co-creator of the Trinity, with her participation in the birthing of Christ on earth and her ascension into heaven. Studies on Mary became widespread during this time. There was a paper presented on the Black Madonna at the December 1952 meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Word got out that it was to be presented, and religious people, mostly Roman Catholic nuns and priests, attended the presentation. In the beginning of the session, half of the attendees walked out in protest. Imagine that, walking out on a paper presented on the phenomena of the Black Madonna, which had been part of European Christian religious traditions for nearly 1,000 years, and half the people present walked out. Consider the fact that in Byzantium, after the beginning of the Arab incursions in Asia Minor, religious images were banned because of the emperor at the time. This emperor thought that since the Muslims had no religious images, they were winning the war, and maybe God preferred no religious images. Statues, icons, and various images were destroyed by the military, and riots ensued. Bitter divisions happened in the church over the presence and practice of image. People who favored or possessed religious images were excommunicated and banished from the kingdom. Great debates ensued for decades, and the presence of image was restored in the church eventually, but not without great upheaval. The Protestants in the Reformation, as well as the French Revolutionary soldiers, smashed and burned art all over Europe, particularly Black Madonnas. The Black Madonnas were burned at the stake. The picture on the right you see is a fresco in an ancient church in the Balkans, When you visit such churches, the eyes and faces are often scratched out. That was done by the Muslim invaders. The other is a statue that was destroyed during the Protestant Revolution. Why? Why so much uproar, destruction, and violence over pictures and statues? These actions show the power of image, the power of art. And religious art has a deep and profound power. As Sister Joan tells us, religion has power in multiple directions. One of the main reasons people reject divinity and organized religion is because of the behavior of institutions who use a label to identify themselves, essentially to justify their oppressive power in the name of whatever deity that is popular or expedient at the moment. This was certainly true in the case of Constantine the Great. As is the case with all historical figures and all humans, actually, Constantine was a complex character. We can all agree he was driven by the desire to amass earthly power. Rudolf Steiner tells us that Constantine was initiated in the old Roman mysteries, which were very materialistic, where the initiate took over the mysteries through force rather than learn from them through ordeals of knowledge, endurance, and revelation. The latter process is true with other mystery traditions, including our own current one of the Christ mystery. Constantine had enough clairvoyance to see the future, where Rome would eventually fail. He also understood the era in which he was ruling. The Christ mystery was the mystery of the time. He knew the Roman mysteries were diminishing. Their time was over. In an attempt to force his will on earth through spiritual means, otherwise known as religion, to justify his power and the power of Rome, Constantine took up the Christian mysteries, but injected Roman structure to the evolving movement. He thought if he could make Christianity Roman, it would last for 1,000 years. This was the reasoning behind moving the capital of the empire to Constantinople and establishing a theocracy there, all in the name of Christ. He chose Byzantium because of its strategic location between the three continents under Roman influence. He brought an obelisk that was stolen from Egypt and placed relics of the true cross, a nail from the crucifixion, and a crown of thorns, and a statue of Athena called the Palladium. He brought this collection with great fanfare to the center of the newly named city of Constantinople and put a bust of himself on top of the obelisk. So Constantine used religious image to establish himself as emperor over everything of the old and new mystery traditions. Constantine established the ecumenical councils that sought to standardize Christianity, and the concept of heresy was born. For sects that promoted the deeper mysteries of Christ, meaning truth, equality, freedom, and community, that Christ was a sublime being of the Son that sought to help humanity think independently, recognize the spiritual origins of physical matter, so that humans could take up their destiny to help transform the universe from a cosmos of wisdom into a cosmos of love. All of this got thwarted by the mechanization of the Christ mystery through the actions of Constantine and his followers. These actions, the materialization of the Christ movement, which was supposed to help liberate humanity from fear and increase intimacy with the divine, this transformed Christianity into an institution of domination, amassing wealth, and earthly power. The spiritual movement that was in direct conflict with the Romanization of Christianity was along the Camino de Santiago de Compostela. The main art form of this movement was the Black Madonna, and these images have been placed along PowerPoints throughout Europe. The narratives of the Black Madonnas are similar in many ways. They are hidden underground in caves, in forests, and in the mountains. They are somber images that often endure much damage, but seem to survive against all. They are carved by St. Luke the Evangelist, whose symbol is the bull, the artistic image of the will. And they are black, the symbolic color of cosmic will being transformed into human will. So, what is real, lasting power? St. Paul, whose impulse was to carry the Christ mystery to the next phase of evolution, which is the creation of the beloved community, uttered a profound statement regarding earthly power. We can find it in 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9. 2 Corinthians chapters 11 and 12 were addressing how different people were claiming to be super apostles opposed to just regular apostles. And Paul was complaining to God that he was overwhelmed by the adversaries opposed to the regular apostles. The response to his complaint from divinity was, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul was trying to establish a community dedicated to the principles of the Christ mystery. The formation of the beloved community, which was and is the next phase of the evolution of the Christ impulse on earth, was the purpose of Paul's ministry and writings. Most of what he dealt with in trying to establish this community of Christians was people, out of habit, were trying to amass earthly power, to establish a hierarchy of specialness within this new Christian community. People were interested in the power and prestige of those who ate a certain way, were circumcised, were Jewish first, and so on. And what about those Gentiles? Could they be part of this new direct line to divinity? The core of most of the arguments consisted of who was somehow better than others and more worthy of love from the divine. The response from divinity was that this power that people were striving for was perfect in weakness. In the early days of Christianity, the whole concept of God becoming a human and suffering as humans did was a completely incomprehensible concept to many, especially the powerful. All sorts of theories were made up to make divinity into the human concept of power. Some are sort of amusing, others very complex and beyond most of our capacity to understand, and others actually thwarted the advancement of the mystery, the Christ mystery of our time. Please note that in the midst of all this messing up, of this misunderstanding of the mystery and enforcing human power, somehow the Christ mystery did seep through. And I see the Black Madonna and other events, people in movement, as grace overcoming such perversion, as well as many movements currently underfoot, helping us all understand the true healing love of divinity and helping that come to fruition. I feel this is a major reason why the Black Madonna has captured the imagination of so many people these days. In the Buddhist tradition, which brought the concept of compassion to the world, there are 5 spiritual powers: faith, effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. Notice in this list a lack of mention of threatening the life of others with weapons. The Madonna is a symbol of wisdom. The Madonna and child are a symbol of love being born from wisdom. This is our deepest power, to transform wisdom into love. And we are told that in the end, there is only faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Thank you so much for spending time with me, and I wish you many blessings on your journey.